another episode trying to think a little bit about how to drive business growth, how to delight customers, how to tackle technology imperatives, and how to really drive an emotional connection between the brand and the customer. And today we're talking a little bit about digital maturity. So before we get too far, let's go to Tim. And Tim, tell us a little bit about what is digital maturity?
Sure, thanks, Rajesh. When I'm asked what is digital maturity or how I define it, my general response is, it's a brand's ability to adapt in the marketplace to changes that are happening in front of them, whether it be, a pandemic like COVID-19 or some other shift in consumer behavior. What is a brand's ability to react and make sure that their customer experience is still delivered in the way that those users expect, regardless of what is happening. And that's usually reflected through the processes that they have in place, the technology that they have supporting their customer experience, and then the culture that is instilled throughout the talent that is delivering that.
Thank you. And, Peter, I know this is something you think about a lot as well, around technology being one component, but also the other components that must be there for a business to be mature, for a business to be able to rapidly take advantage of opportunities or changing conditions. So do you want to build on that for a minute?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think some great examples of what this might look like is, how much risk tolerance do you have as an executive team to try new things? A lot of things are sometimes not going to work. How do you test? How do you learn? How do you validate? These are all notions that exist across all the projects you're working on as an organization right now. But from a customer's perspective, the how isn't important. From the organizational perspective, the how is one of the most important things. So for us, when we think about culture, when we think about process, we're thinking about, what are the core elements of what it means to be a member of this company? And what does it mean in terms of the openness and receptiveness to new ideas, how you might approach new things, how you might keep a lens when you're moving through the day-to-day to see how this might affect customers, how this might affect suppliers, how this might be part of a bigger strategy, or something that 3 to 4 years from now is something you're growing into and giving you the opportunity to have flexibility in net new revenue models. And I think that's the part that people oftentimes don't look towards. They say, hey, we're going to be investing in tech. We're going to be investing in a whole new organizational design because we want to enable our ability to transact the way we transact today digitally. A lot of firms that we see, and when you look at Amazon, you look at others, they use their tech in one instance, and then they find parallel market opportunities or bowling pins that they just can start knocking down and deploying in a consistent fashion to drive wholly new, previously unapproachable revenue streams that drive long-term organizational growth independent of the goals of the particular product.
Great, thank you. And Jennie, can you share a little bit of your thoughts and sort of Airship's position on how do we do it, right? How do we go and start that assessment piece and start looking at it as practitioners in the space? And then what are maybe the stages or the categories? How do you break this problem apart a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think there's a few things connected to process and culture, but first, from the Airship technology perspective, we like to give a marketer flexibility to be able to send out messages based on contextual data and contextual events with customer interactions. So I'm going into the app, I'm taking an action, and then we're able to serve up a message about that in the moment when it's relevant to the customer's experience. Building on that, we want to take that and connect it into the entire life cycle. So is someone in a store and we're using location targeting? Is someone following up after a purchase and we need them to get an update on their order status, or maybe even follow up to ask them to write that product review?
And the hard part about what was just described is this notion of, think about the organization that you work at. Who owns each part of that journey? Who owns each element of that? And how are those people coming together regularly to improve the customer's interactions with the brand holistically? And I think that's a new challenge, a new thing for a lot of different brands. And we're seeing multiple models emerge about how to suit and meet customer demands across various industries for various verticals and various end stage customers.
If I can just drill one more into what Jennie was saying, earlier on in your response, you were talking about how Airship enables you to deliver contextually relevant messages at scale. I think having a platform like Airship in place within your brand is indicative of brands that have higher digital maturity than others. You know, you might have noticed some apps post COVID-19 that had shifted their content, like Chick-fil-A as an example that I point out, which, you know, it looks like they shifted their app, the content, all their messaging to be in line for the moment, the pandemic, and it almost felt like that happened overnight. You know, that wasn't a fluke. You know, they have a platform back there that is helping them deliver those messages at scale and be able to shift and pivot quickly. So, you know, to Jennie's point in terms of delivering contextually relevant messages, I think that is one key piece in the technology and also the process that need to be there to be able to pull that off.
You know, Tim, you said something that I want to dive into for a second too, which is like the tech is there, but we all know the tech can be there for a very long time before it's made useful, practical, and driving business value. So it's not just the tech being there, but it's about building the organization to support the net new tools, to use those tools in ways that are wholly new when something like a global pandemic comes around and you have to change everything overnight. But if you didn't have the process to do that, if you didn't have the approval cycle, if you didn't know how that was going to go from marketing to legal to get into the application, and you had to do that all net new, it might have taken you 3 months to do that exact same thing that Chick-fil-A did in 2 days. That's what we're talking about when we're talking about maturity. And Jennie, I cut you off. I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. It's also business process maturity, right? It's not a technology maturity or a marketing maturity alone. It's the business process. So the teams who are able to get those messages out right away in different channels, you know that they don't operate organizationally as an SMS team and an email team and a mobile team. They all talk to each other. They have a form of communication. Maybe they share a calendar about their marketing campaigns. Maybe they even use a platform like Airship to then orchestrate the messaging and pick the best channel, right? And not blast everybody. And I'm sure you guys have gotten these where you get a push and a text and an email all at the same time about the same thing. It's not a good customer experience, right? So the more communication that you have from a business process perspective, it helps reduce that friction from a customer.
Really interesting. As I'm listening to all of you talking, I'm thinking that perhaps digital maturity breaks into 3 categories. And one of those categories is around the experience itself and making sure that there's a world-class experience there for customers. And that means having an eye towards both the front of house items that customers interacting with, whether that's the people or the tech, but then also the back of house, understanding of the visibility into the supply chain, the way the tech comes together in order to power that experience and overreach on the expectations customers have. And then it sounds like there's this part around business processes and how teams come together and organize and collaborate in order to adapt to the change or take advantage of the opportunity. And finally, it sounds like to be digitally mature or business mature, there's also this idea of like the people mindset, the collaboration, the intrinsics around how we work. And so anyway, it's just fascinating. Tim, one of the things that struck me was you were sharing a little bit about Nebraska Furniture Mart. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So I know this is kind of an off-the-wall example, but I happen to have recently moved. And so me and my wife were in the market for getting a new fridge. And so if you've ever been in Dallas, Texas, one of the places you always go to look for things like this is Nebraska Furniture Mart. Nebraska Furniture Mart is like humongous. And so they have everything under the sun, and they always have good deals and good financing, in my point of view. So we found a fridge that we liked, and when we ordered it, we were told that it would come in, within 4 weeks or so. Well, that 4 weeks came, and then it got pushed back. And it turned out that happened 4 more times, to the point where we finally canceled the order and now ordered a different fridge from Best Buy instead. So I think the point I want to point out, the point I'm trying to make there is that a digitally mature company should have the visibility into their supply chain to let the customer know what's going to happen with their order, especially more than 3 months out. And so I think it's not just the digital front of house, so to speak, it's also the back, how critical it is to make sure that the efficiencies and the insights and the data that's being delivered to your consumers, that is all part of the customer experience. That all needs to be in line.
So before we go and talk about how to make it great, anyone have any other examples that they want to maybe point out where they feel like a brand or business fell short?
You know, I'm going to take a counterintuitive one here. For many people watching this, you might be thinking, yeah, they're talking about really large businesses that have established digital presences that, yeah, they might not be meeting expectations. That's not universally true. So a great example there is Trader Joe's. Trader Joe's has a very clear understanding of their supply chain. If you ever go and something's out of stock and you're like, hey, do you have this still? Be like, yeah, let me go check in the manager dashboard. Hey, we're actually not buying it. This was a limited time order. We only bought it once. And you're like, oh, okay. I totally get that. They have chosen not to invest in customer facing tech and to invest in process, to invest in culture, to invest in their people, to deliver that excellent experience. So it's not that you have to use technology to do it. It's just at scale, when you're managing across disparate teams with disparate products with an ever-changing product mix, it's oftentimes easier to leverage technology. So if a firm out there is looking at this and saying, hey, I'm at 0 today, and I know that I need to get bigger, and I know that I need to get better, keep in mind that you might not be seeing a lot of the tech, but it doesn't mean the tech's not there. It also doesn't mean that you have no pathway to growth. Sometimes it's easier to play catch up than it is to start from the beginning.
And the thing I love about that Trader Joe's example is that someone at some point in that process took the time to have an understanding of how the customer interacts in the store. They know that somebody is going to go ask a question. They know to have employee training on what people are going to ask. How do you go look it up? How do you find the answer, right? Like it's a complete end-to-end circle of a process where they've been very considerate about everyone along the way. And that helps you flex and adapt when you learn something new.
I do have another failure, which is Pier 1. Pier 1 is a clear failure. They misunderstood their competitive set. They misunderstood their buyers and their buyers' expectations. They likely didn't do enough looking in terms of who was working with them, who was buying with them, what targets it made sense to go look at. And they were looking at those at Pottery Barn, other what they considered comps, instead of Target and Wayfair, where there were clear demand from a user side to be on the platform, to be shopping anyway. So if you surface something around home goods, I might not have been on the platform to get something around home goods, but it doesn't mean I'm not open-minded to buying, which means that competitive sets are expanding, and the notion of who your competition is not a yearly or every 3-year activity. It should be done quarterly.
Great. No, really interesting. And sort of implicit in what everyone's saying here for me is also this idea of, we talk a lot about customer experience and maybe not enough about the employee experience and how to keep that employee, that partner, that collaborator who represents the brand and the business and actually drives growth and supports customer service engaged and trained and understanding what's happening. And in some sense, I wonder if, like there's a digital maturity index, I wonder if there's also some sort of maturity index that takes into account how well an organization is investing in enabling their employees, their most capable front of house people to drive brand and growth and emotional connection. So shifting slightly, Tim, perhaps we could get into maybe the categories of digital maturity and what does it mean to be in some of those categories, and how do we look at it as practitioners in the industry?
Yeah, sure. It's a great question. And the first thing I want to say to preface this is, sometimes these categories can be case by case based dependent. So like depending on what industry you're in, what market, you might have some categories that might make sense to add on or adjust here. So there's not just a one size fits all model, but this is one that can be a good foundation to grow off of. And so the categories that I generally start with whenever we're working with somebody who needs help in improving their digital maturity is, first of all, look at the things that you put in place in your business. Like, what are the things that you can actually physically directly impact and influence? So things like process, culture, and digital touch points. And within digital touch points, that is implicit of the back-end technology that is used to support them. So just because like Trader Joe's, for example, doesn't have digital facing touch points, doesn't mean that they don't have digital in their organization supporting their operations. And so I think, first of all, we take a lens at those categories to look at what it is the business is doing. And then can we look at a reflection of that business and how they're actually performing with that structure that's put in place. And so these are like the qualities of the people and what they're doing with the things that you put in place. And those categories are broken down more about speed, agility, and quality. So these 6 categories are usually like the standard ones that we start with, and you can actually obviously customize them. But the things you put in place, the process, the culture, the technology and digital touch points, and then the reflection of how they're performing and the quality of their delivery within their speed, their agility, and their quality of their delivery.
Anyone want to build on any of that?
Yeah, I think one thing that I would share in terms of that is, how do we then take those outputs and rank firms? So we think of firms early in their digital maturity as initiating. And this means that there's a certain level of digital processes and culture that's highly reactive, somewhat unpredictable, and poorly controlled. And I think we've all been present in an organization that has elements of that, maybe at a business unit level, so we can relate. As we start to see growth, we start to see more digital processes and culture established, but not necessarily executed in a standardized measure. And what we mean by that is, yeah, we might have a process, but this time it's different. And that's okay. It's okay to be different. It's tech. It's always a little different. But if the majority of times the scenario is this time it's different, maybe those processes aren't either the right fit, you don't have the right training, or you have to invest a little bit more in terms of operationalizing your ability to utilize digital. When we get to this middle ground, which we call defined, the digital process and culture is defined, training is established, metrics are established, and metrics are a really important one. And the level of risk is understood and processes are audited. Did we follow the process? Why didn't we follow the process? Okay, yes, I know that we took some risk here, but this risk was warranted. And risk is not always a negative thing. In tech, risk is everywhere. It's about managing risk. It's not about avoiding risk. If you take a purely avoiding risk standpoint, growth is going to be really hard to achieve when it comes to utilizing digital to drive maturity. Then when we get to the very top 2 quartiles, we're thinking in manage and optimize. So manage, decisions are quantifiable with data. Leadership is leveraging KPIs and evaluating the health of the process. Just because you built it once doesn't mean you don't have to rebuild it over and over and over again as new technology is introduced, as people cycle in and out of your business, as maybe some of your products that you sell or lines of business change. And then finally in this optimized group, it's like the golden egg, right? We always want to get up to that optimized group, but once you're there, it doesn't mean you're staying there. And so that's making great database decisions. And you basically can refocus processes quickly to look at both current state opportunities in the marketplace, and COVID's a great example there, as well as future state opportunities. Hey, we're facing competitive pressure. Like, what is everyone always scared of? Amazon is coming to my industry, right? We hear this all the time. Amazon is thinking about coming into my industry. What are we going to do? Well, a firm that's in that optimized category is going to say, let them come. We'll beat them on the field of battle because we're so confident in the tools that we have and our ability to adapt. But that's a very rare firm. And that's a very, very limited set of people and organizations that can build such a system. That's all good, because keep in mind, just because you built it doesn't mean you keep it. Some of the greatest leaders we've ever seen in technology quickly fall from grace for a variety of financial issues, market changes, dynamics around cultural change. This is why we get back to the beginning, right? Culture is important. Process is important. It's not just how you're leveraging technology to drive change.
So one of the things that I like about how we approach our work is that often we are people who think big, but we start small. and we incrementally move forward. And we don't wait for perfect, but we just go out and we try. And incrementally every day we get better and better. And I'd love to understand how, as a practitioner, as someone operating a business, how do I get started on this, right? Because it can be very overwhelming to be facing a gap in where I want to be and where I am. And how do I think about it? And lack of budget and lack of time, but yet we know that we could generate some momentum. We know that we could pull something down off the shelf and make it a little bit better. So Jennie, maybe you could kick us off with a little bit of how do I get started here? How do I, as somebody operating in a business, what do I do?
Yeah, I think the first thing that I like to think of is the design thinking term fresh eyes. So taking a fresh perspective of whatever you're evaluating. And that could be a customer experience or it could be your own internal processes. And I think if we have that sort of honest assessment of what's going on and really looking at things through a different lens, we may be able to find out where we are organizationally on things like risk tolerance, as Peter mentioned. If we don't understand where we are from a risk tolerance perspective, we don't know whether or not we need to make change. And I think starting to have those honest conversations and doing an assessment of where you are on the scales of process or collaboration or multiple channels of technology working together, really doing some thoughtful analysis is the first place I'd suggest. I think there are, as you said, very small increments that at any stage, anyone at any level of an organization can go and do and take a look and see maybe there's some change that you can make.
Yep. Laddering on top of that too, fresh eyes is a great concept, and you can use friends and family to do fresh eyes too. So from a consumer side, you can just have them go do a shopping journey for you and say, hey, what'd you think? How was your experience? And when you hear something negative, don't be reactive. It's the most important thing, right? You're going to hear a lot of negative things. You have to be open-minded. You say, okay, I'm going to try it with one more person, see if they have this, see if this is a trend, and then start asking some basic level questions. We think a customer journey is a really good place to start, because if you ladder into a singular customer journey, yeah, your business probably has many, and it's not universal to a singular, but let's stay focused. Let's stay low fidelity here. Look at your customer journey and start to map back the systems that enable that customer journey, forming what we call service blueprint. When you have that notion, kind of that map, all of a sudden you have one piece of paper and you're like, look at all these places where there's some substantial failures. You have a list ahead of you of maybe you go talk to 3 or 4 of those owners of the disparate systems that influence those customer journey and ask, hey, why might I have received this error message at this point? Or, I thought we had a training program around associates, but I had a really negative experience and I replicated it on 3 occasions. Here's the place where I replicated it. And you would be surprised at how infrequently that exercise is conducted, even though it doesn't take a lot of effort. So that's a great place to start. And then of course, there's more high fidelity ways to go about it in a more structured place, but sometimes the easiest way is through the eyes of the customer.
Absolutely. And when was the last time that you took that perspective and walked through the process yourself, right? And if you really want to challenge, try to take a fresh eyes and do first person work through whatever process or purchase cycle or anything. It's a challenge to make yourself step back and really look at it from a different side.
If I just said one last thing here on that is, at its core, I feel like it's trying to move out of the land of subjectivity and into a place where you have a baseline understanding that is informed by data, so that as an organization, you can start making decisions that are geared towards, the things that are going to make the biggest impact on your bottom line. And you always keep focused on the things that are going to make the biggest impact. And that's how you continually increase your digital maturity at the fastest rate.
Small wins drive big changes too. So if you can put one small defendable win on the board, it opens up a lot of authority to maybe take out some of those more clunky and challenging problems that are going to take some cross-discipline or cross-siloed efforts to go after fixing that root cause.
Great point, Peter. The biggest impact does not necessarily mean the biggest problem or the biggest challenge in terms of work. That means like a cost benefit analysis or an impact analysis that shows you what would make the highest impact with the lowest lift to go one level deeper. That's where you want to focus. Right there.
And most people will not be excited about those two concepts of like, oh yeah, let me just casually run a cost benefit analysis in my infinite spare time between emails and Zoom meetings. So you don't have to get so in depth there. You can literally do it on the back of a napkin. How many customers go in? How many customers come out? Where are they failing? Do I not know where they're failing? Can I replicate it with my own experience? Are there proxy points of data along that journey that I can draw upon? Maybe I don't have data at the POS, but I do have it from the beacons that we had from that tech project 3 years ago that we never commercialized. Maybe there are things disparately floating. We like to talk about structured and unstructured data. There's probably way more unstructured or non-actionable data in your ecosystem than you know. Go chase it down. It might have been a long time since someone came at that data with the lens of the customer in mind.
Great. No, awesome. This has been a very interesting conversation for me personally. I know that one of the things that I'm going to take away is this idea of thinking through the experience, thinking through the process, thinking through the people and culture. I also love the conversation around the idea of building momentum and starting small and making that incremental change happen. And also this idea of like really leaning into the customer insights, the customer pain points, the customer friction, the idea of ghost shopping, the experience that we're all creating, and finding ways of driving more and more value. And of course, that Nebraska Furniture Mart example, Tim, congratulations on your move. Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Jennie. It's been awesome to have you. That's another episode of Bottle Rocket.